everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. It is late, and tonight is a beautiful night, and I want to try to make the most of it. Typically, Monday nights are late, and I know that people are tired, and we have a new topic tonight that I want to talk about. It's difficult to not think about the topic, which is honoring your parents, without putting it into the context of everything that's going on around the world today. I don't know if Israel or the Mossad was responsible for taking out that helicopter in the border between Iran and Azerbaijan yesterday. And if they did, it still would be miraculous under the conditions, the circumstances that that helicopter went down on. But yeah, we also control the weather. It's true, we control lots of things. But the point that I'm making is that because the world is in such a crazy disarray, right? There's no question to me in my mind that whenever we see things going haywire, right, when things make absolutely no sense, in the same day that the Iranian president and foreign minister were declared dead, the ICC feels that it's okay to, make a request for a warrant for Hamas leaders and Israeli, government leaders. They're going to compare Netanyahu to Sinwar is absolutely insane. There's zero moral equivalency. So you see things that make absolutely no sense. It's like, are you serious? You're gonna compare them? They're the same. You see that kind of stuff when you're living in a time in history where people are literally, chanting for and supporting Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. Okay, when people could go ahead and say things like, I was at a dinner last night, and one of the key speakers is a professor at NYU, and who I know very well, and I actually went with her on a tour with students to Mauthausen, which is a concentration camp, which is unique. And when we were on that tour, we discovered that her grandfather her grandfather's the only Jew buried in Mauthausen with a tombstone on it. And the guide that was guiding us, his name was Daniel, German, and he was telling the story about this Jew that was buried there, not realizing that it's her grandfather. And she was telling us earlier how she wants to move her grandfather's remains out of Austria, and move to Israel. And how this guy, whose grandfather was a Nazi, and found out when he was in high school that his grandfather committed all kinds of atrocities and was very proud of it, he had to live with the guilt and dedicated his whole entire life to giving tours to Jews and non-Jews about the Holocaust. So this woman is a professor at NYU, and she has a friend, professor, a colleague that's been friends with her for the last 14 years. And she comes up to her, this Jewish professor, and says to her, "Oh my gosh, what's happening around the world is horrible." She's like, "It must be so difficult for you." She's like, "Yeah." She's like, your mother was a Holocaust survivor, right?" She's like, "Yeah, it was." She's like, "Wow, it's so difficult. There people are saying and so that." She's like, "Yeah." She's like, your grandma must be turning over in her grave to watch the Jews do this to the Palestinians." Like a complete role reversal, right? And this is something that she thought was her friend, a colleague. So when you hear things like that, when you see people, defacing the U.S. property and replacing it with all kinds of Muslim extremist propaganda, you ask yourself, have I lost my mind? Where am I? You question, you pinch yourself, am I awake? Is this reality? What's going on? So when I see this kind of behavior becoming super clear, to me, it's just an extension of something that was always true. We live in a world called Olam Shikra. It's called the world of lies, right? You think that before it was more clear to you. It wasn't, right? It's just, right now, all you're seeing is the true nature of the beast that's been hiding for so long. But nothing's really changed. The only thing that's changed is now people feel more comfortable and confident to come up and express what they're truly feeling, right? So when I see a world completely off-hinged, right? When I see things off the rails, I know that it's there to inspire us to think more deeply about inner things, not outer things. I truly believe the only way in which you and I are able to push back against the tide of insanity that's surrounding the world isn't by just protesting and responding and being above moral keeping a higher moral standard. I think that it requires an internal spiritual response, and therefore, if post October 7th hasn't gotten you to think more deeply about your identity, which is being challenged for a reason, okay? If you haven't thought more deeply about, well, what does Judaism really mean to me? If you haven't thought more deeply about, well, what can I be doing? What should I be doing? How can I be more, specific and precise about my own personal development and growth? Then you're missing out the whole entire point of this time. So I would say there's two areas that immediately jump out at me that we all should be thinking about, very, 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 very carefully. One is Shabbat, because Shabbat is something that doesn't just happen on a Saturday, right? Shabbat is the whole entire week in preparation for your Shabbat experience. And the other thing is the thing that comes after Shabbat, which is Kibbud Av V'Em, honoring your parents. Why? Because those are the two easiest things that we could be doing, and we mess it up all the time. And I would say we probably mess up our Kibbud Av V'Em much more readily, much more frequently than we do our Shabbats. You're probably all expert Shabbat keepers, but when it comes to being an expert in honoring our parents and our mothers, we kind of screw it up. And my question is why? Right? We know that the Kibbud Av V'Em is part of the Aseret Dibrot, part of the 10 Commandments. We know that it is number 5, the 5th commandment, and we know that what comes before it is Shabbat. Right? So the question is, well, why was it important to single out these commandments? Why is Kibbud Av V'Em in that nexus point between the first 5 and the last 5? Right? The first 5 being between man and God, and the last 5 between man and man. Why is it there? And why does Shabbat come right before it? Why is there a correlation between honoring your parents and the Shabbat itself? And then just going back to that original question, well, if all of the mitzvot are equally important, right? We wouldn't say that one mitzvah is more important than the other. Would you agree that all the mitzvot are important? Who says that one is more? Why did God choose to single out these 10? Why are these particular commandments singled out more so than other commandments? So, when you ask the question, you should start thinking a little bit about what the answer might be. Now, in Judaism, we have this principle that is, you'll see this principle true in all things, and that is, for example, when you look at a DNA, right, of a person, right, the DNA has all the instructions of everything that child's ever going to be. Height, color, eyes, obviously with the parents, with the mother and the father together, that's the DNA, right? Everything that you need to know about what that kid's going to be is right there at inception. All things on the planet operate in that way. There's a moment where two forces collide, they become one, and in that moment, at the beginning of that moment, everything that is needed for the development of that particular item is there from the beginning until the end. We may not see it, right? When you look at a fetus, today they have these unbelievable 3D color scanners of babies, and you get to see video footage of them when they're 1 month old and 4 months old and 5 months old and 6 months old, and it's unbelievable watching life unfold. And it's funny because when I look at, I know you may know that I'm a grandfather. I became a grandfather about 11 weeks. Today's 11 weeks, and thank you so much. And and so when I look at my granddaughter, who I love holding, my teeny Miliani, that's her name, right? And when I hold her, I think back about those 3D video images of what I was looking at, and I see so much of her now as an 11-month-old as I did as a 6-month-old in utero. It's weird. It's just, you need time to allow it to like unfold. When you see pictures of me as a child, right, all you have to do is put a beard on me, I look exactly the same, right? It's just allowing time to unfold, okay? And therefore, when we speak about God creating the world within 7 days, right? Bereshit was that initial point where all things in nature were created, and all we saw was time unfold to allow it to express the reality that you and I are living in right now. But the beginning of all things has the end in mind as well. It's not just a unfolding, the uncertainty. Everything is very precise and perfect. And therefore, when you think back about who you are as individuals, where do you come from? Your parents, right? Not an accident that your parents are your parents. Not an accident that these were the people that had to give birth to you and raise you and so on and so forth. That's part of your spiritual DNA, and it's the only kind of spiritual DNA that could have given your soul the body that it needed to do its thing in this world. How does it unfold? It takes us a whole lifetime to see how the unfolding of our own reality is so much tethered to who our parents are or are not, depending on the choice that we make moving forward. And therefore, when we think about that concept of that, it always goes back to the source, right? The whole purpose of Kibbut Av V'Em is to remind you something very profound. If you think deeply about this idea that it's all things unfolding to the source, then let's go back to the source. Your parents' respect has nothing to do with honor. Even though there's this concept of honoring, kibud, honoring your parents, and having having fearing your parents. But the thing that's causing it has nothing to do with whether or not they're honorable or not. We honor our parents and we give awe to our parents simply because they're our parents. And it's really an act of hakarat hatov. That's the force. If you want to understand where the true force of honoring the parents comes from, it comes from a simple place called hakarat hatov. When I am modeh, right? When I feel grateful, right? Modeh ani. I'm also modeh. I'm also testifying to something. When I'm showing gratitude to my parents for what they've given me, I am also at that same moment, I am admitting, I am testifying to the fact that I am coming from something else, someplace before. I come from a whole other realm, a whole other reality. And that realm and reality is God. So for example, there's a famous story of three brothers who each went out to different parts of the world to explore. They all were traveling. And they all left on the same day, and they all came back on the same day. A year later, 12 months passed. And one brother comes back, and he discovers this device that allows him to see from one part of the world to the other part of the world. The other brother ends up discovering this device that allows him to travel from one part of the world to the other part of the world. And the last brother came back with something that allowed him to cure any disease. So they're all coming back, and they're all sharing the things they found, the wisdom that they found around the world. So this is so cool. So the brother that has the power of seeing from one end of the world to the other world opens up his little box, his portal, and he sees this princess who's beautiful. It's the first thing a guy's looking for as a girl, right? Anyway, so he opens up his thing, and he sees this girl, and she's beautiful, and he notices that she's not feeling well, she's sick, and that the king is looking for a cure and can't find one, and it's in a far, far away kingdom. So this brother gets the other two brothers in the room and says, listen, with our powers combined, okay, we have the ability of saving this person, right? You have the power of, I found the girl, you have the power of traveling, and you have the power of healing. Let's go and let's heal this person. So they say, okay, high five each other, and they get into this vehicle, and they travel to this place, they find the princess, they come to the king, explain who they are, talk a little bit about their backgrounds and why they're there, and then the guy comes out, and the last brother heals the princess. And everyone's watching this, and they're amazed. Wow, how did you find us? How did you get here? Where are you coming from? And where did you find the cure? None of my medical, chief, royal medical team could figure it out. How did you figure it out? So they start telling about their adventures and how they found these things. So the king now is stuck. He's like, how do I decide which one? Thank you so much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyah b'dvaro. Which one of these boys, these strapping young lads, should I give my daughter to marry? Right? All three of them saved her life. How do I decide which one it is? So he's like, you know what? I can't make this decision. I'll let my daughter decide. So the daughter, this is a very, very progressive king, and she says, I want to meet all three of these boys. She wants to see which one's the cutest. And no, she did. Anyway, so she questions all three of them and asks what each one of them brought to the table. So the first guy says, listen, princess, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be here right now. You'd be dead. I found you. I'm the guy that discovered you. My power was looking around the world and I found you. And I'm the one that got my brothers to come and save you. And the other brother says, well, listen, bro, you may have, found her, but what good is it finding the person if you can't even get to her? It's because of me that you're able to actually get to her. It's because of me, he was able to actually give her the medicine. So I'm the guy. The last brother says, listen, it's true, but bottom line is, I have the power of the medicine. I have the power of healing. So the princess stops to deliberate, and she says, you know what? I'm going to choose the guy with the medicine. Why? Like, why? She says, well, because let's say I get sick in the future. Who's going to heal me? The other two brothers represent the past, whereas the last brother with the medicine represents the future. This is the mashal that the Dubno Maggid gives when it talks about kibbud avim, right? Our parents represent our past, because they're very much responsible for getting us to where we are right now. But our future is tethered to God. And therefore, when we think about the idea of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, those first few mitzvot, of the Aleph, that unfolding, that first mitzvah, unfolding all the other mitzvot. The 10 Commandments is the root for all 613 commandments. Shabbat is a testament to God and Him creating and controlling the world. Our parents come next because there's a correlation there. If I can't honor my parents, I can't get to God. My parents represent my relationship to the past. And God is the only thing that can ensure my relationship to the future. Your parents can't do that. As a matter of fact, when parents try to play that role, they end up screwing up their children. Part of being a parent is letting go and letting a kid do his thing. The way in which I can ensure that he's going to do his thing very, very well is simply by empowering him to have a relationship with Torah, its mitzvot, and God itself. And in that process of him working through what does it mean to be a good person, how do I give tzedakah? How do I pray? How do I care? How do I love? How do I do all these things? In that process, he becomes his own person. Him honoring his parents becomes something profound. Many years ago when I was debating as to whether or not I should go to Israel and leave my parents and my family behind. My parents were going through a very rocky relationship, and I was very instrumental as being the peacekeeper, the gatekeeper between my siblings. And my parents felt like I was abandoning them, and my siblings felt like I was abandoning them by making that choice to leave. It was one of the hardest decisions I ever made in my entire life. Saying, I love you, but I need to take care of me. The thought of you being selfish versus helping other people is a very hard thing to do. And I said, you know what? I made the following calculation. I was 19 years old. I said, you know what? I can help my siblings and my parents now, but I know if I spend the year in investing in myself, I can help them for much longer. So I tried convincing them, don't see this as me abandoning you. See this as a way of me strengthening myself so I can come back and do so much more good for you and the world around you. They're like, yeah, thanks. But I did what I had to do. And I remember my mother thinking that I was absolutely insane. She's like, you're crazy, you're gonna come back a fanatic, and we don't need fanatics. She's like, religion's open for the masses, you're nuts, what are you doing? And I'm like, Ma, I love you, but you don't understand me, I gotta do me, I come first, right? And I wasn't disobeying my parents and rejecting them, it was the opposite. I saw that investment in myself as a way of coming back and inspiring them and doing more for them. It was only about 7 or 8 years ago where my mom acknowledged that actual choice on that day and said it was the best choice you ever made. I'm so happy you listened to me. That was the best choice you could possibly make. Now, why do you think it was so clear to her only 7 or 8 years ago that was the best possible choice I could make?
She saw the fruits of your labor.
She saw the fruits of my labor, right? She saw my children. She saw who my children are. She saw my relationship with my wife. She sees what I do for the community. She sees my involvement in the world, and she's proud of it. And she knows that when you look back at that moment in time was that jumping off point. That was a catalyst for everything that I am right now. Question?
Just on that point,
yes.
Did she also maybe see the relationship that she has with your kids? Like, was she still in the situation that she was in? She could be the grandma that they like don't go to because things are so.
Oh, for sure. I'd be like, how many grandparents have grandchildren that could sit at a table for 2.5 hours and just talk to them? Right? That's not heard of today. It's unheard of. And I believe so much of that has to do with my wife's amazing educational and wisdom that she's able to instill in my children, because I'm the antithesis of all those things. And I'm just there to make sure that they're somewhat balanced. But anyway, so now the world itself unfolds in this unique way so that you and I have the ability of recognizing that we could turn back to our origin point. The whole purpose of Kibbutz Av itself isn't just an exercise in honoring our parents. It's an exercise in recognizing as to whether or not you can have a relation with God. If you can't honor your parents, you can't get to God. If you can't turn back and respect the origin point of who you are, you can't go back and recognize who you are as a human being, how are you going to ever find God again? L'dugma. Let's say your parents and your grandparents ask you for a glass of water. Who do you get for? Who goes first? Parents or grandparents? Why grandparents? Because your parents have an obligation to honor their parents, and since you have an obligation to honor your parents, your obligation is to honor their parents, right?
That's why I said.
I know you were thinking that, but you didn't say that, right? Let's say you have a choice between your spouse and your in-laws. Who comes first? Your in-laws. Same logic. Yeah.
Your parents and your in-laws. How does that one work?
I meant your spouse. Oh, your parents and your
Now
in-laws.
I'm asking.
Your parents comes first. Your parents come first.
So both moms are coughing at the same time.
Your mom is more important. Let your husband take care of her. But your parents come first.
You're supposed to unpack your enemy's package first before you pack their package, right?
Yeah, that's one way of seeing it. Yeah.
So you got your great uncle is there, your father is there, and the great uncle is older than the father. He's going to obviously want you to give him first.
It's true. So listen, Mike, let me give you another example. Let's say, there's a mitzvah of standing up for your parents when they walk into the room. It's one of the hardest things to do today. Aside from all the other things, like, you're not allowed to call your parent by their first name. You're not allowed to say, hey, whatever it is, you can never you're not allowed to use your mother. And by the way, if your mom has a name that is not common, you're in trouble. The reason why, if your dad's name is David, you could say David because David is a common name. You find it everywhere. But if his name is like some kind of weird, strange name that is uniquely his, you can't say his name. What's that? Christopher. Yeah. If your dad's name is Christopher, it's challenging. Well, Christopher's a common name. But he has some other weird name that is uniquely his. You can't even say it. Yeah.
Like Nalini.
Like Nalini. That's why the baby's name is Nalini. This way they can say the name. Right? That's not why, but anyway. But I imagine that's probably where some of that logic came from. Okay? Where was I going? Your parents? Standing up. So your parents, you have a responsibility to stand up when your parents walk into the room. Right? Your parents walk into the room, you have an obligation to stand up. You're sitting there reading a book on the couch, your mom walks in, you have to pause and get up. Okay, now, the sensible thing to do is to ask permission for your parents to say, you know what? There's a halakha that says I'm supposed to stand up every time you walk into the room. Do you give me the permission not to stand up? And they say, yes, you got the green light not to stand up. Now, suppose you have a friend in the house and your parent walks in the room. Do you have to stand up, or can you sit down because your parents gave you that kind of absolve you from standing up? And the answer is you have to stand up. Why? Because the person that's there doesn't know whether or not you're absolved or not. And it might be seen as being disrespectful. Right? Now, I'm sharing these examples simply because, do we take this idea of honoring where we come from seriously? If you believe that honoring your parents is a stepping stone to getting to what I would say a higher truth, right? Seeing God in your life, then how are you taking that mitzvah more seriously? Maybe if you start at number 5, and maybe the reason why it's 5, the reason why it's there is because if you have the ability of honoring your parents, you'll have the ability of honoring people. The last 5 of the says that he brought are all ben adam chavero, between man and his friend, right? Honoring your parents is a bridge between two different worlds. It's that point where I'm able to look back and say, it all comes from God, and then look down and say, my responsibility is not only to my parents and God, but it's the people that come after me also, all the people around me. How am I bringing this idea of kavod into my life? For those of you that were in our Midot series, I think it was like last year, we spoke about this idea of kavod. Remember what we said kavod is? The idea of kavod in Musar is seeing the value in another person, because the word kaved, heavy. Do you see the heaviness, the weightiness, the worthiness, the value in somebody else? It starts with honoring your parents. When we talk about reverence, right? Yirah. We're talking about having awe. How do we have awe for our parents? Are you in awe of your parents? Do you recognize their individuality and the things they had to overcome to be the people that they are? You know, I gave a class on Thursday night in Great Neck. It was one of the most interesting things I've ever did. It was a class for mothers and fathers from Great Neck. And it was a class that the students, we give classes in Great Neck on Tuesday nights to the girls. They wanted us to give a class to the parents on how they can be helpful in helping their children be ready for dating, like helping them kind of understand the dating process, right? And you know, it was just culturally fascinating to me, just some of the questions that people were asking and so on and so forth. But it was also, there was this one thing that stood out to me. It was fascinating. This all the parents had a hard time understanding why should. I'm very adamant about the boy. He's coming to pick up a girl. Okay, he has to come into the house and shake the father's hand and meet the parents, even if it's for a minute. Not to sit down for tea, no rice, none of that kind of stuff. Just a quick hey, hi. I'll be back at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Goodbye, I'm out. That's all it is. That's all I'm asking for, right? So what? On the first day, yeah. Right. Why?
Is he gonna ghost her after he does that? Probably not. It's like a big one.
It's important for there to be an expression of honor. You honoring her parents, you're honoring her. You honor the parents, you're honoring her. You're honoring her, you're honoring the parents. It's the same thing. If the guy doesn't have what I said was, I actually said the word to the parents, they started laughing. I used the B word. B-A-L. Anyway, so if he doesn't have the cojones to come into the house, okay, then he's not the right guy for your daughter. Very simple. If you don't have the guts to walk into the house and say, hi, sir, hi, ma'am, thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you, and walk out the door, don't date. Very simple. It's a basic act of honor. If you don't have the ability of honoring someone else's parents by coming in and saying shalom, I'm not saying sit down, I'm not saying interview them, pull out the thing, I'm just saying very quick hi and bye, that's it. And what's interesting is that the fathers were the most resistant. The mothers wanted the guys to come in, and they're like, no, it's okay, Rabbi, he could come in, I don't want to scare him away. I'm like, scare the guy away? If the guy doesn't want to come in, right, he's not the right guy for your daughter. But it's okay, it's not okay. This has to change, you have to have the courage to go in. How far do we take this idea of showing respect? Because if you're unable to respect someone's parents, she's like, the question started with, Rabbi, is it okay if the boy texts my daughter to come to the car? I'm like, no, it's not okay. You cannot have this guy text the daughter to come to the car. You text the guy back and say, please come in. My parents would like to shake your hand and meet you. You should put the fear of God in that guy before he comes to his house. Yeah.
What happens if your reason for not letting the guy into that is because you don't want your parents to meet them because you have a relationship with them that wouldn't allow this to be the best? They would be traumatized if you said no, or he said no, they would get hurt, or there's a different reasons that you don't want them involved in your dating. How does that?
Listen, that's a great question. I think that there are benefits and detriments to having parents involved in our dating life. I think that it's obviously better if we had healthier relationships where we can have our parents involved on a healthy level, right? Balance. And I spoke about that with them. What is a healthy way of talking to your kids about it? What's our job? What's our responsibility? How do we prepare them, and so on and so forth for this? But I would say that, listen, yeah, your parents definitely should not have to know everything that's going on, but you have to meet the guy at some point. And it's better to have it off early. Well, first two things happen. One is, obviously your parents are not there to tell you who to date, right? You're gonna have to make that choice. There are 3 areas in halakha that you don't have to listen to your parents when it comes to dating. Yeah?
Don't you think it's such an honor and a privilege for him to enter your home? He hasn't earned
Well, hopefully, that's a good point. Well, hopefully, if it's a fair question, I would say like this. I would say if you're going out with someone, then he better be honorable enough to come to your house. If he's not, then don't go out with him. You know what I'm saying? Like, why are you going out with somebody you don't want in your house?
You don't know Paul.
Well, you better find out. Don't go out with him. I would not go out with someone I don't know. I'm not letting you're right. I would not let someone who I don't know in my house. But I hope that before you go out with someone, you do a little bit of research to figure out if he's honorable enough to take you on a date. Because if he's not, then you're wasting your time. Do not go out with someone who don't want. Do not go out with someone you don't want to bring to your house. Period. He's the wrong guy automatically. Yeah.
What if you don't live at home?
So that's a whole other thing. If you don't live at home, that's a whole different ballgame. If you don't live at home, you don't live at home. You're on your own. We're talking about people that live at home. We're not talking about where the parents are involved in that level.
Just to be clear, you're not saying that we have my parents and have me have to go back to Jersey just so that they
No, I'm not
You
saying
wouldn't go that far.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if they're coming to the house and your parents are home, proper thing to do is for them to come in. Right? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that.
Make sure you don't live that. Live alone, but have to be sure from my parents' house.
Okay, listen, I hear it. By the way, if anyone says that, you know what, my parents demand that I be picked up from home, I respect that.
Rabbi, I quote you though that you said it doesn't matter.
Yes, you can quote me. You can quote me. It's quoted. It's recorded over here. It's recorded over here. It's recorded over here. That's why I was sharing. Wasn't sharing it to tell you what I think you should be doing. I was sharing to these parents and how I thought there was an interesting cultural gap over there, that no one saw the value in, hey, let's bring this guy into the house. Just as an act of honor for the parents. That's why I brought it up. I'm sorry, like I'm not trying to trigger anybody. Oh no, my parents, no! I spent my whole life running away. This is exactly why you came to this class. Yeah.
So it was your son that got married, right?
What's that?
It was your son that got married already?
Yes.
So did you give that expectation over to him that before he?
Oh, my children, no, you're not. Yeah, you have to go to every single day he came to the house. Every single day he came to the house. And when he had to break up with her, he came to the house also. Right? Say goodbye to the parent. Like it was just like whatever it was. Like it's just like you have to be a mensch. I gotta raise mensches. I'm not gonna raise wusses. You're gonna go out there and you're gonna be a man. You want you to be a man. To be a man means taking ownership of the situation that you're in. That's the way I define manhood. And if you can't do that, don't date.
No, seriously, you should write a book.
I should.
Your literal like sons in their early 20s come and give a TED talk because like what they managed to do, a lot of guys in their 30s and 40s can't do.
Yeah, I really do believe that so much of where we see the state of the world, and I'm trying to build into this point. Like I think that the world itself is in a space that it's in simply because there's been a breakaway from seeing the value in the generation that came before us. Especially if your parents are immigrants, right? There's since industrialization has happened over the last 150 years, there's been a breakaway from parent-child, tradition being passed down from one generation to the next generation. My grandfather was probably like the big cutaway from like the old world, the farmers, to the men that moved to the big city, right? And them going to the universities and like leaving the old, woogie, ancient ideologies behind and like adopting a new democratic, open-minded way of thinking. When you cut ties from where we came from, you can't look back to that the source of origin. It's very easy to kind of lose yourself in start thinking that you can do whatever you want to do. This is why you have kids today on campus whose parents have no idea what their kids are doing. The kids don't care about their parents, they don't respect their parents because from an evolutionary perspective, the parents are closer to being a monkey than they are. And therefore they're more advanced than their parents. And therefore I don't have to listen to my parents. This is part of the indoctrination of people today, youth today. The most profound thing that a child can have is a very deep, healthy, meaningful relation with their parents. Now remember, okay, who's in control of that relationship? You or your parents? Why are you in control of the relationship? Because you can walk away from that relationship at any point. Your parents are going to forever be there if you have healthy parents. Okay? Obviously, we're all talking about healthy, not unhealthy. Okay? You're in control of that relationship. So who determines your own moral responsibility to your relation to your parents? You do. Well, how many books on honoring your parents have you read over the last 25, 35 years?
Is anyone reading those books?
There are books like that, of course. Right? Wallerstein wrote a book called Honor Them, Revere Them. It's a daily lesson on Kibbutz Avim every single day. for 365 days, and you can take one book and read 1-2 pages a day for the whole entire year and walk away with some kind of a profound lesson about thinking more deeply about honoring your parents. Because if you're not going to do it, no one's going to do it for you. You live in a culture that says your parents are irrelevant. You live in a culture that says the greatest value you could possibly have is being independent. Why would you want to have to depend on your parents? I want to be independent. I want to be my own person. You know what? You know how hard it is to be in a marriage when you think that the goal of life is to become independent? You can't be in a marriage. Marriages don't work with independence. Two people independently living together, what does that mean? What does that look like? It's called divorce. It doesn't work. The goal of marriage is interdependence. Where do we practice interdependence? At home, with our families. But I want to run away from them. They drive me crazy. Yeah, well, if your parents are driving you crazy, your spouse will drive you just as crazy. Sorry. Spoiler alert. It's going to happen. So the idea of kibbutz av isn't just like, oh, I got to honor my parents for the sake of honoring my parents. It's more about me choosing to be part of a process that allows me to bring kavod into the world, not just for my parents, but the people around me, for my spouse, for my children, for my community, for the people around me, for God. It's all interconnected. It's one thing. And if there's a breakdown between that relationship between man and parent, okay, there's a breakdown between the relationship between man and God and man and his fellow man. It all starts at home. That's where it starts. And if we don't spend time on investing in recognizing that initial point of connection, that one place that we're all coming from. I mean, listen, I grew up in a very interesting environment where we were super traditional, but like no real organized religion, right? And I remember how that kind of played with my own identity as a Jew. What do I believe in? What don't I believe in? What do we do? My parents don't do this. What do I do? My parents don't go to synagogue. I don't go to. I must be reformed. You know, many years ago, I was running these trips, and I had like this questionnaire. Like after my trip, like where do you see yourself on which denomination of Judaism are you part of? Just Jewish, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. So I saw this one person wrote Reform, and I know they're not Reform. So I'm like, why did you write Reform? She's like, well, when I started this trip, I was just Jewish. Now I just went up a notch. I'm Reform. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. But anyway, so like, it's this idea that I'm supposed to be elevating myself into becoming something bigger, something more. Kibbutz av is the starting point where we look back and say, you know what? I believe that there's a God in the world. If you don't believe in God, you're right. Honoring your parents is something that should be intuitive. And you see this, by the way. That's why, by the way, the Gemara points out that we learn Kibbutz av from Esav, right? We learn from stories of Goyim and the Gemara. Why? Because intuitively, everyone should know about what honoring your parent is. Makes sense. Animals have certain kind of reverence and respect for their parents. But we want something more than that. What we're demanding is something much more profound. When there is no honor to the parents, there's a breakdown in society. There's no fear of God, there's no fear of man. I become a complete narcissistic individual that only thinks about myself and no one else. By the way, when you're dating someone, I think, when I look at the people, it's super important to me to find out what their relationship is like with their parents. It's important.
What happens if
No, of course there are scenarios where you have a dysfunctional parent and you can't have a relationship. I get it. I have one of those, okay? And it forced me to think very deeply about, how I take care of my mother and how I take care of my family and so on and so forth. My father and I we haven't spoken to the guy in 20 years. So I deeply know what it's like not to be able to have a relationship with someone he's not in a place where they can have that relationship. But that doesn't mean I don't honor them.
How do you honor them?
I honor them. Well, when they're there, I try to respect them as much as I can. I'm not condescending. I stand up. I do my thing. I ask the questions and so on and so forth. I'm not disrespectful. I'm not going to talk down to them. You know what I'm saying? I'll do whatever I can in the situation so I can be as respectful as possible. Honoring a parent doesn't mean I need to fly across the world to spend time and say hello. You also have to have a relationship to have that ability of honoring your parent. Yeah.
Just like for reference, one time I was on an Israel trip, and one of the teachers was talking about how she worked with a bunch of girls who like came from various homes, and they were told to like write a letter bakar to their parents.
Yeah.
And one girl had come from an extremely abusive home, and she
Right.
was put into foster care.
Right.
And she sat there struggling, and she was like, I don't think I can thank them for anything. And the teacher's like, try. And she sat there, and like an hour later, she was like, my dad taught me how to tie my shoes.
That's beautiful.
So
Listen,
it's
there are scenarios. Her dad taught her how to tie her shoes. There are scenarios, by the way, where a parent halachically could lose the status of being a father or a mother. Right? That's a whole other, beast of there are scenarios where, but I'm talking about ideal scenario. Ideally, parents that are healthy and normal, if that's what you got, then you have to be working on establishing and maintaining that and building that relationship for yourself. If you're struggling with that relationship, I'm pretty certain you're struggling with your relationship with God and with people on some level. Yeah.
You just said healthy and normal. I just feel
Yes.
like there's so many people who define healthy and normal differently.
Yes.
Like,
So how do you define it?
okay.
No, you don't have to answer it for me.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying in your own head, like forget about what people think. What's your personal definition of it? And then figure out how to apply it to your parents. Now, if you could have a mentor, you speak to them and say, hey, listen, I'm carrying around this definition. Is this a good definition of what healthy and normal parenting looks like? Could be you're right, it could be you're wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you should challenge it.
I also feel like for me,
Yeah.
personally, I definitely had a different path than my family.
Yeah.
But for me, it wasn't until I had that relationship with God that I was able to then channel that respect for them.
Sure.
But what you're saying is the opposite, so it's just interesting. Like I feel like everyone's
No,
different.
sometimes it goes the other way. Meaning sometimes the way, if you're able to find God, and you go back to Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and then you go to Shabbat, and then you get to give it out. It does work that way sometimes also. But the reason why you're able to get there is because of some type of reverence you had, or maybe you wanted. It still came from you. You know what I'm saying? It was a choice that you made, that you were searching for something. It wasn't this like passive thing that you're waiting around for, like I'm waiting. So many people just wait for things to happen to them. But you were proactively looking for something and you found it, thank God. So my question to each of you is, well, we didn't do the sheet that I want to do with you. God willing, this is going to be the series. I'm going to try to do, I think, like 4 or 6 classes on this topic. And what I want to do is this was like an opening conversation just about the idea of, well, how do we think about our relation with our parents and what's its function? And what I want to do with you next week is kind of go into like a deeper philosophy about thinking about parenting. And then in the weeks after that, I'm going to go through the actual laws of like what kibbutz is, like what are your actual halachic obligations, which I think is like a fascinating conversation on its own. So I want to end a little shortly. I want to end right now. Actually, it's 42 minutes. But any questions before we call it a night? Yes.
What would you consider normal level of involvement we should have our parents in our home lives?
So I would say to you that the first thing, I don't know your parents, and I would just say like that. The one thing that we all need to be working on is building a relationship with our parents. To build a relationship with our parents isn't just, hey, how are you? Okay, great, bye. That's not a relationship. A relationship means that you understand and appreciate who that person is, and you're able to support them in dialogue, support them by being there, spending time with them. I'm not saying every day, I'm not saying I know what the time is, everyone's different. But it's about maintaining and building a relationship. It's good. You're gonna have to honor your parents, right? And therefore it has to be something that's coming out of you. You're choosing to make that call every single day. You're choosing to send the flowers, to write the card, to do that nice thing to make it, it's coming. You have to say, this is someone I need to revere and respect, and therefore I'm going to go out of my way to do the things, the little things, to show them that I do it. That's all it is. That's where that really, and then I'm assuming that in that space, with a healthy parent, they're going to reciprocate, and and so on and so forth. Does that answer your question? So it's just about, at the beginning stage, just building that relationship on the most superficial levels, and hopefully develop something more. Yeah.
So
Yes, you should walk in and say hello and shake their hand. Okay, good.
I think it's twice. How about
Good, good.
if there is a case where you're looking to someone or going out with someone who doesn't have, like, either they come from a divorced family or they don't have the best relationship with their parents,
Yeah.
how important is that to factor in if we continue to date them, and how do you evaluate that as time goes on?
Well, that's a good question. So it's definitely a factor. It depends on the circumstances. You know, sometimes you have a parent that is, you know, unreasonable, takes on unshakable stance. Is not building the relationship, is not investing in the relationship, abandon the child, abandon the family. It's all kinds of scenarios that are there. So it depends on how it happened. You know, so and there are circumstances where children, like even like myself, I was thinking like me having to literally run away from home. Against my parents' best wishes, they did not want me to leave. Was not an act of defiance and not coming from a place of no honoring of my parents. It was just coming from a very big place of clarity that I knew that there was more I had within me that I just couldn't do it at home. So, which is probably why the 3 areas, by the way, that you don't have to listen to your parents are: number 1 is who you're going to marry. Number 2 is if you feel that you can grow from a rabbi that lives in another country, you could leave without their permission. And number 3 is living in Israel. If you feel that you could grow spiritually more in Israel and your parents want you to live here, they say don't go, you don't have to listen to them. Those are the 3 areas. This is written in the Shulchan Aruch 500 years ago. It's from our Masorah from 3,200 years ago. Super clear that that's what we do. Meaning even a parent has a limit to how far they could push their dominion over their children. Okay? But the one thing that is clear, that the whole purpose, the function of the mitzvah of kibbud avim is to be the bridge between man and God. It's supposed to be that point of origin that allows you to feel that sense of gratitude, that karta tov, so that you have the openness or maybe even the humility to open yourself up to other relationships and other possibilities, because ultimately it's going to be you. And if your parents can't demand that respect, if your parents can't get you to be humble, then nothing on the planet will humble you. Have an amazing week. The question that I want you to think about is, what's the one thing you can do to incrementally improve the relationship with your parents? Don't have to have an answer. Sometimes just thinking of the question is part of the solution itself. As Hashem will continue the conversation next week. Have an amazing week, everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah.